My brother has made this point to me. He lived in China for 4 years, and it's sometimes a little like, yes, America is bad, but there are some people in the left space who are perhaps overly generous when it comes to conversations about censorship or any other sort of negative aspect of Chinese government, simply because America is in fact bad and their critiques of America are true and legitimate. And he was, reflecting to me earlier this week about what it took for him to overcome certain censorship hurdles to access American media when he was living there and American news and things like that. And so I did want you to speak to that a little bit more, perhaps with the lens of trying to anticipate what might be coming for Americans using the app and what might be the limits of the sort of social exchange that we've been seeing over the past week or two.
Yeah, I think definitely, in China, in terms of all my trips that I've been there, it's a place where I think people have relative freedom to do what they want, but the only thing that they really can't do is criticize the government. And that's something that I love to do. So when I'm in that environment, it's a bit stifling for me because puts me in a very uncomfortable position of what I can say, what I can't say, especially as a tourist. I'm actually legitimately concerned. Hey, can I be filming right now, or can I say this out loud? Because there are, things that we don't control and I don't when I travel to a different country, I try not to just kind of be the sort of typical American thing and I'm just going to impose my will upon this country. I try to observe, what the locals are doing, what the customs are, so I can kind of fit in and respect their culture a little bit. And that's kind of what I noticed. So in terms of your question around, yeah, I think there's going to be some limitations. I think for China, that one of the things that you know that's a threat to their government is anything that can undermine the rule of the Communist Party, which has been going on for 80 years. And so if there are things to say, hey, especially this you saw this during COVID, right? We saw this when the Chinese government had the massive lockdowns there. They don't want that type of sort of American imagery of people enjoying stuff. They want to make sure that they have complete control of all the policies there. So in terms of if you're starting to say stuff where criticizing what the Chinese Communist Party can do, that's the difference. And I think if I were to kind of summarize the big difference in this in the way these philosophies are different is in that, in the United States, I think capital rules all. I think we can all agree that capital rules everything. If you have money, you basically control the government. And on the other side, even if you're the most successful tech entrepreneur or business person in China, you don't control. The Xi Jinping is the absolute power. You doesn't matter how much money you make, you will disappear if you question his authority. And I think that is kind of the limit when the Americans start, let's say, learning more about the Chinese, say, oh, you could start doing this a little bit better. What about this? That I think will be kind of the end of that exchange in terms of my take on things.
There has been a lot of, you know, commentary along the lines of, yeah, but have you tweeted about Tiananmen Square? And then there was pushback that said, yeah, I can't, like, do you think they don't have Google? And so I do think there was a kind of a sort of a bad faith version of how bad the censorship is. And then I think there's a good faith critique. And then a part of the bad faith critique is not being clear eyed about the extent to which censorship is already happening on American apps. And to your point, Jessica, about how you felt like your Gaza content was so throttled on TikTok. Help me understand this, though, because I believe that. And I feel like I saw that happening on Twitter to certain extent. I've definitely seen, for various reasons and various subjects, swings and valleys of algorithmic censorship happening on the US apps. But it also seems true, James, like you were saying, that your Gaza content really took off on TikTok. Is that just because of the sheer power of interest, even the algorithm couldn't kill it?
Well, so to clarify that statement, there was about 2 to 3 weeks after October 7th where the Gaza content was really taking off. And then
I see.
after that, it became very difficult to post about that issue. And as creators, we found all sorts of interesting ways to try to circumvent those algorithms, either just not mentioning Gaza, not mentioning the word Israel, coming with different euphemisms to try to get around that. I started doing things like I wasn't doing subtitles and anything that I think could throw off the algorithm. I think it was getting to kind of a paranoia state where we're just trying everything we can to try to not be caught. And then I know of friends of mine who basically posted the same video, one hashtag Free Palestine, one without the hashtag, just to see the difference in how it took off, how it the algorithm responded, and the one without the hashtag was 10x the number of views. So there definitely were things that they were doing, and I do actually, I know I've been very generous to TikTok in this conversation. There are bad parts about TikTok, which I find, to be very Chinese, to put it that way, very opaque in terms of how they operate. Like us creators, I don't know about you, Jessica, I haven't heard any major in terms of communication to the creators about the ban. Like, hey, this just keeping you abreast of what's going to happen. Like, are you still going to be paid? This and that. We don't know what's going on. And I've talked to their employees. I was invited to one of their TikTok creator summits a couple months ago, and I was trying to ask the employees their information about, hey, do you know if you're going to have a job in like a month and a half? And nobody knew anything that was going on. So I think TikTok is actually overtly kind of the most censorious app, probably because they wanted to play ball with the United States and not be banned. So there was a lot of different kinds of content violations. My stuff gets taken down there now quite often because of various things. They say it's misinformation or against community guidelines, all sorts of stuff. And then I have to do the appeals. So I think there are downsides to how TikTok operates as well. And I think some of it could be attributed to sort of that Chinese culture of secrecy. Whereas on the others, I haven't really had any issues on Instagram or YouTube in terms of content violations. I'm curious, Jessica, if you've experienced the same thing on TikTok as far as being throttled or what you've seen them do to the content.
Yeah, their process for community violations is just super opaque. As you said, you'll get a video flagged. I had a video that was about the CIA's coup in Guatemala. And I had up behind me the CIA memos that have been declassified, and it got flagged for misinformation. When nothing I said was not purely factual. And you go through an appeal process, they take the video down, your account gets less views for a few days, and it feels like censorship. It feels like they're doing that because they want the app to be a friendly place for advertisers, and they didn't want to be banned in the US. So I think they followed what they saw other big tech companies doing. I'm sure people in the Los Angeles headquarters got some phone calls about what content should fly and what should not. That's just how it goes in the United States. But I do think that it was a little bit better for a little while than the other apps. And that's what made it special, is creators that wouldn't have done well in a meta environment did well on TikTok. And I think that's what made it special, is we got all of these creators that would have never become big creators because of TikTok. But at the end of the day, like, it is true that there is censorship of content in the United States, and it's always in the direction of what's friendly for corporate interests. And that's what's really sad about seeing this TikTok ban go through. It's confirmation of what we already knew and got indications of with these community violations. Every big creator can mention a few. And I think that especially during Gaza, like, the first few weeks were good, but there had to have been calls from people with special interests saying this can't happen on an American app. We cannot have people question the United States relationship with Israel. It's very obvious there's a few phone calls made, and then suddenly the algorithm's working differently.
I mean, the fact that they've been openly pro TikTok ban people have been openly complaining about how disproportionate the reach of pro-Palestine content is versus pro-Israel content. You've seen all of the bar graphs with, the hashtag I love Israel or whatever being teeny tiny at the bottom, and all of the Free Palestine hashtags getting so much organic reach. And the accusation isn't even really that, it's being pushed. There has to be an acknowledgement that that's where the hearts and minds of people are right now. That is exactly what's been going on. And that's been the anxiety and concern for a really long time. It's interesting that you both are talking about these content strikes that you've gotten and content being taken down, because as much as I think that the culture of Twitter has gone to the right post Elon's purchase, that his posts in particular are being pushed and boosted. You don't have to follow him to see every single thing that he's ever said or even thought. That there does seem to have been a cultural shift I haven't actually personally experienced posts being taken down. I know that there have been several instances of people's accounts being suspended at the very least. But it does seem as though like there's some sort of rough justice happening on Twitter where even if it's someone ideologically opposed to Elon, if like Glenn Greenwald or some other big accounts start tweeting like, hey, you can't censor this person, then Elon's so online that he'll undo it. Or perhaps it's that I haven't experienced as much of this as a blue check, as someone who had a blue check prior to Elon buying the app, that offers some kind of protective veneer. But it's weird for me to sort of reckon with what you guys are describing as, frankly, like fairly regular censorship on TikTok, which is perceived to be the freer of the platforms.
I think it is interesting that it is known as the more free speech one, but I think that's a lot. I think, Jessica, you kind of alluded to this, or was it you, Bree, with the charts and things like that? I think that was a kind of a manufactured narrative that came out of various interest groups, either fired by Meta, or I've looked into some that were more or less from the Israel lobby, trying to paint TikTok as a place where everything is, the Wild West, when in fact, if you're a creator on there, it's kind of not the Wild West, and you have to be very, very careful about what you say. And sometimes that lends itself to some kind of creative moments where you're trying to figure out how to say a certain thing without actually saying a certain thing. So that was kind of interesting and fun.
Yeah, there's this whole language, right? Like this, like you can't say sex, you say S apostrophe eggs or whatever, and like unaliving. And all of this language that's become like kind of mainstream started because you're trying to get around censorship, no?
I think, or
that's suppression, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so I think I just want to take a moment to kind of dispel the notion that TikTok is more, has been pushing pro-Palestine things, and it's particularly anti-Semitic and all of these things. And if you look into a lot of those studies, I looked into one last week from Rutgers University, that the one that's been commonly cited as TikTok being the most, the most anti-Semitic of all the apps, in that they didn't, if you looked into the methodology around the research that was done, they didn't really even go and analyze the For You page, which is how all of TikTok users consume the content, which is, we're just scrolling and seeing what comes up. They're literally just doing like a search for, let's say, Tiananmen Square, or doing a search for Gaza, and they're just seeing the number. They're just doing a count of the number of videos that come up in that search. So if you naturally have a user base that is just more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, of course, you're going to find more videos, but they didn't even look at, let's say, the number of views that video got. They just looked at the count, and then they published it and said, well, this is super anti-Semitic. And then you have people like Nikki Haley, right, on the debate stage say, well, if you watch TikTok for every 30 minutes you watch TikTok, you become 17% more anti-Semitic.
The third thing is we really do need to ban TikTok once and for all. And let me tell you why. For every 30 minutes that someone watches TikTok every day, they become 17% more anti-Semitic, more pro-Hamas based on doing that.
And I think that's where a lot of the narrative creation comes from for the people who fund these studies, whether from the Meta side of things, to say, hey, TikTok is particularly more dangerous for teenagers, and they're promoting all kinds of unhealthy behaviors, right, the TikTok trends and this and that. And it turns out many of them started on Facebook or Instagram. And then on the other side, the Zionist lobbies talking about how it's more anti-Semitic, and you figure out, oh, well, it's not actually the case.
I'm really interested in hearing and finding out what it looks like to be 17% more anti-Semitic than you were 30 minutes before. It's so specific. Sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
Yeah, I honestly don't believe those numbers. It sounds like pseudoscience to me, but I think what happened with TikTok is that other platforms had already been through moments where there was an assault on Gaza and then some kind of ceasefire agreement and people posting on both sides. So they already had a way to put in their algorithm that you shouldn't get content sympathetic to the Palestinian cause or the fight for liberation. And TikTok had not existed through one of those major moments where the user base was news consuming, right? For a long time, it was mostly like teenagers dancing. And then it slowly evolved into an app where like a lot more people were on it and there were meaningful discussions of news. And that happened. And then we saw this assault on Gaza by Israel that people were posting about. The IDF had a TikTok account. They were posting. There were tons of Zionists posting on TikTok. It's just that it didn't have guardrails to suppress Palestinian content. So it was almost like what would happen on an American social media app where there were no guardrails. And for a few weeks, I think we saw what it would be like on TikTok. I don't think TikTok had anything in their algorithm that favored Palestinian content.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought experiment, Jessica, because I keep coming back to this anecdote that Ari Robinhoft from the Bernie 2020 campaign wrote in his book about how the Facebook algorithmic change really hurt Bernie going from 2016 to 2020. And that a lot of the reach was very much organic post sharing on Facebook. And so when there's this sort of ostensibly value neutral change that gets made that says, okay, we're going to deprioritize news, it ends up hurting the left. And of course, the narrative around it was we want to get rid of quote unquote misinformation that's right skewed. But the story that doesn't get told is the extent to which left coded news is also getting suppressed. And that definitely seems to be the case here with the Israel-Palestine issue, which is part of why it's so frustrating for so much of the free speech conversation and the people defenders of it to be happening exclusively on the right, except for now this Hail Mary from Chuck Schumer, which I can't make heads or tails of. As we close, I'd like to ask you both a little bit about the culture of TikTok, because when you were talking, I found myself reflecting when you were saying TikTok hadn't survived or experienced a sort of a big newsy moment like this. I was like, well, when was TikTok invented? 2016 is the answer. I don't remember it. I feel like it really had a cultural explosion maybe during COVID with all of the TikTok dances. I don't have a clear memory of being especially aware of it prior to then. And of course, as an elder millennial, I'm consuming TikToks through Instagram reposts and Twitter reposts. But I wonder what you guys make of it and what your kind of cultural memory of sort of the emergence of TikTok as a real tastemaker in social media was like. I mean, do you remember when you first started using it? Mm-hmm. Jessica?
For me, it was right after the Bernie campaign. So it was like, I was one of those people that thought you changed the world by like knocking doors. You got to get out there, talk to people in person. And then, of course, COVID made that totally impossible. It was terrifying for an organizer to be like, what? We can't leave our house? And so I saw people making like comedic skits that weren't political at all. But I was like, this is a way to sort of talk about these issues. And I started posting because I needed an outlet for organizing and talking about politics in the news. After Bernie had dropped out and Biden was our nominee, it was pretty bleak. And so I think it was originally like vlogs and lifestyle content and people lip syncing and dancing. And then because people wanted social connection during the pandemic, I think they started getting it through TikTok. And that's really when it became a place to have conversations about culture and news and politics in a way that it wasn't used for before. I think the pandemic played a huge role in that.
Yeah, for me, I'm the same. I was a TikTok consumer much longer than I was a creator. I think I started watching around the same time in 2020, before the pandemic, and then I consumed more of it as the pandemic went on because I had nothing else to do. And I think I did see a shift at some point because a lot of it in the beginning was very much just entertainment stuff, dances, different skits. But I think it was around 2022, I would say, when more news or more political creators started to get onto that app. And that's when I started to see it change. And then you had a proliferation of different types of communities on TikTok. And so as in any app, as it matures, right? And early days of YouTube, a lot of entertainment, but then people started using it. And then you kind of had a different, kind of a spreading out of different ideas. Because for me, like the biggest TikTok creator, I believe, is Charli D'Amelio. And I don't think I've ever seen a single one of her posts come across my For You page. That's how diverse things are on TikTok. So that I think is Charlie
that's like a it's a girl. It's a cute girl, right? Who is that?
Well, I
The
think
name sounds
she's
vaguely
probably
familiar.
a woman now. I think you could say,
Sorry.
but um, but yeah, I
Oh
think it's
yeah, I've
so.
seen this woman. Okay.
Yeah, so she was responsible for a lot of the early TikTok dances and trends and things like that. So I do think, in terms of the cultural taste making, I just think it's so much easier to make a video on TikTok versus, let's say, a YouTube or even an Instagram, where it's much more curated and thought out. It's just more authentic and quick, in that it's now allowed people to be faster. That's where trends happen faster. Like, for example, if you compare it to the longest thing it takes, probably Hollywood would be the slowest, right? It would take a year or 2 years to get something out. And now TikTok, it takes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes to get a video out. And so you're starting to see culture being impacted by TikTok a lot faster, a lot easier. And now all of a sudden, the traditional players are freaking out a little bit, in that, wow, we don't really control how people think anymore. It's the people on TikTok that really have the ability to shape the cultural conversation, and I think that's really scary for a lot of the traditional the traditional media, including news. I think TikTok is a big threat to traditional media organizations, because they used to be the first ones to actually to break the story, to shape the narrative around a story. And now a lot of us can do it faster, than they can do it. And that's kind of a scary position for them to be in.
Yeah, because to your point about speed, there is something I think about the editing features of TikTok that also does seem to really facilitate the competition with news outlets. Like, I've been experimenting with, like, am I going to keep trying to do some version of a radar post rising, which means I link up with a producer and I'm paying her to edit these videos. And I'm like, oh, this is, that's a commitment and a financial investment, versus TikTok. The thing, again, I've been challenging myself to try to learn how to do this. I haven't. But like the thing that I've seen you do so well, Jessica, both of you, where you throw the you throw the graphic up behind you that you're talking about, and it's effectively like the news block in the corner when you're doing a radar, or Jon Stewart talking about the picture in screen photo. You're able to respond so quickly. You guys have these videos up so quickly because you don't have to do all of that editing. And I was just scrolling through a list of some of the most popular TikToks, and there's like the one where it looks like the guy's flying on a broom like Harry Potter, because he's just edited every time he jumps into the air. And it's like, like, I think there's something about the editing features that have enabled a kind of like sophistry, like a sort of like knowingly lo-fi, but like effectively hi-fi, like fun transitions and stuff, that have really pushed people to experiment with the medium in ways that you don't find on Instagram or any other app. And I think that those things, combined with the rising popularity of crop tops and the fascination of watching young girls squiggle around on screen in a crop top, really made the app take off in the way that it did.
Yeah.
It's a lot of midriff.
There are very concerning parts of TikTok. I think James and I might be existing on a more wholesome side of the app than some of the users. Yeah, there's.
I haven't seen the. In terms of, I think I don't like my Instagram feed. I think it's not healthy for me. They think I like either sports or scantily clad women. I don't love that. I don't see any of that on TikTok. For me,
James,
TikTok
they're
is
not just making it up. They're getting the information from somewhere, James. Don't tell it yourself.
I don't enjoy that. I enjoy the TikTok algorithm. That's why I don't use the Instagram algorithm or the Reels, because it doesn't feed me what I want to watch. And in terms of, I learned so much on TikTok, I have to say now, from different users, and it could be any kind of a topic. I'm just a curious person, so it's just such a powerful app for me, and I think that's what the magic is that exists, at least for now, until I know to me, I'm a little bit what do you call red pilled in this kind of situation, where I know the natural progression of all businesses is to kind of make everything shittier as it goes along, and so that will happen eventually. But I'm just trying to enjoy the moment while it's still here. Similar to your comments on Red Note, enjoy it while I still have it, because it just gets kind of worse, unfortunately.
Yeah, I will also say, like, a part of the rise of TikTok and getting information on TikTok, I think, was created by mainstream media being so heavily corporate run and people being sick of, like, this buttoned up person reading from a prompter that is not their genuine opinion and is instead the product of a bunch of producers and a corporate agenda. I think people started to trust who they were getting their news from on the other side in a really personal way. And they saw that a lot of these TikTok creators are people with law degrees and graduate degrees. And it's not just anyone, you know, reading off what they found online. And so in some ways, people who were creators for news on TikTok were getting more views than the mainstream media, and were also putting out better information. And so I think that was a major threat and also made TikTok a big target, but also made it a huge destination for people to get news. And now Ken Klippenstein has some leaked reporting that the State Department will continue to monitor TikTok because it's such a big news destination. Thankfully, they're protecting us from accessing that global news. But also they're going to be paying content creators to put videos out to promote public diplomacy and U.S. interests abroad, which is just crazy to me. But I think it shows how powerful the app is globally, especially when it comes to getting news.
Yeah, the hypocrisy of the Biden/Harris campaigns, paying the TikTok creators, inviting them to the White House. I think we all saw like Olivia Juliana like tweeting about her photo with the president so proudly, and that K-Hive guy, I forget his name, the black guy who likes to crash out on leftists on a regular basis, who also got invited to the Oval Office.
Tell me what the fuck Bernie did. Bernie is a fucking failure. How the fuck you get your motherfucking mouth to even say that shit, Bernie? Your ass ain't did shit. Booing a bitch who fucking fought for your bitch ass. Who fought for women's rights before your motherfucking ass even got here, bitch. Who the fuck are you, bitch? What the fuck you did, bitch? Your ass ain't did shit. Fuck you. Fuck you. You're full of shit. How dare you? How dare fucking you? Fuck you, Bernie.
Like there is in the story also about there being a carve out in the TikTok ban for like State Department officials or FBI, whoever it is that's doing the monitoring. Like all of these things point to an extreme amount of hypocrisy in the whole thing. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.